It's interesting that God made us different. No one is the same. No one acts the same. No one goes through things the same. And one of the ways that we can see it in a bunch of different directions, but one of the ways is how we deal with pain, with going to the doctors. There are some people who are very attuned to everything that's happening in their body. They know, like they have written down or they have thought through every ache, every kind of like every little stumble, every little like something's wrong, and they go to WebMD every second that they get. They have it on their like bookmarks, and they kind of have it open all the time. They're like, all right, this is what I have. It's weird now because you get something and you go to that COVID list of things, and all of a sudden you're like, man, I might have it because I have a headache. My stomach hurts a little bit. And so then you start looking down the list, you're like, I feel a little warm. You start adding, it's like whenever someone says that something about lice, you ever have that? And you're like, man, my head begins to itch. It's like you start looking through that WebMD thing, and you're like, man, I might have that. I need to go see the doctor just to make sure that I'm okay. There's some in here, and some of you do that for your kids or your spouse. Like, you really need to go to the doctor. That needs to be taken care of. You probably have something really serious. And then there are others who will not go to the doctor ever. And they have no idea. They might feel something. I don't know. It hurts someplace here. Like they're like, it's okay. Yeah, I can deal with it. It's going to go away in a couple weeks, month. I've had it for a year now, but I think I can handle this. I don't need to go. I don't know if you know somebody like that. It's almost like Monty Python. You familiar with the movie, the Monty Python? It's just a flesh wound. His arm is off, and it's just a flesh. I'm okay. I'm good. I don't need to see a doctor. And I imagine that you probably, and even in your family, you could probably pick some version. It may not be that extreme, but some version of that. Someone who just ignores the pain, and someone who like leans in deeply and feels everything, lets everyone know the whole like that. Okay, some people you just talk to them like around, and they'll tell you what their pain is. Like it's the main thing in their life is their pain, and then they ignore it. We're walking in this new series called Emotions. And I feel like we are very similar to that with our emotions. There are some people who feel everything. Their emotions are on their sleeve. Like they ride the roller coaster of emotions. They let emotion kind of drive their life. They're up with the high emotions. They're down with the low emotions. And emotions are the big driver of their life. Like they feel everything. They feel it deeply. And then there are and they parts of it they want to walk in that emotion. There's a goodness to emotion, and there's a whole other group that kind of want to numb it and kind of give everything static, like make everything's okay. It is what it is. I'm okay. I don't need to feel anything. I'm gonna block that out. I don't want emotion. We are spectrum people. And what I find is that someplace in the middle is probably where God designed us to be. I don't believe that He's designed us to let emotion completely drive our life. Let it define our day. Let it define our week. Let it define our year. Like emotion being the driver of everything that happens. But He also doesn't want us to I'm good. Don't ask me about how I'm doing, because I'm good. Don't lean in there. I'm going to numb it. I'm going to just accept it. And we've been taught in our society, in parts of our society, that's the way. Let me go this way. If you're a man, then you need to kind of man up. You need to deal with, don't tell me about your emotion. Don't share your emotion. In fact, some of you are already turning off the switch of the Facebook Live saying, he's talking about feelings. I don't want to talk about feelings. I'm a man. I want to live a manhood. I'm tough. And therefore, since I'm tough, I don't need to feel anything. But God designed us with emotion. That's part of who we are. That's the goodness of life. Even the roller coaster of emotions, we don't really get to experience the high joys without some of the low spots. Right? I mean, it makes the high points all the better when you've gone through some struggle. And so, what I see, and we'll be walking through various emotions over the next 5 weeks, and especially in this season where I feel like emotions, almost everybody is like at like high level emotion wise. How do we walk this season? How do we, and I'll say this, I think God gave us emotions kind of like he's given us pain. Pain is a good thing because pain lets us know when something's wrong, right? There are symptoms, and if we know the symptoms, we can go into WebMD or the doctor and say, these are my symptoms, what do I have? They can start testing and they can figure it out a little bit, hopefully. Like pain, if you had no pain, you'll never figure out what's wrong. What if God gave us emotions for the exact same purpose? Like when we can identify what we're feeling, we get down below the surface, and we can start like, yeah, I'm angry. All right, well, why are you angry? And you can start working through it and bring healing to the places where, like you can work through that. Maybe that's why God gave us emotion. And this morning we're talking about this emotion called fear. Now, there's a good part to fear. Fear is this kind of like self-protection. Like you have this sometimes. Sometimes it kicks in with an adrenaline rush when you're like maybe a car is driving, you like barely cross, the car almost hits you. You're like you like have that fear. You have this anxiety. Maybe let's switch it a little bit. You ever stand on top of like bungee jumping or like even on top of a cliff looking over, and there's this like feeling inside of you, like there's this kind of like it's hard to describe, isn't it? Like you kind of, your stomach goes a little queasy, like you're starting to, you feel like you're leaning over a little bit. You're like you don't want to bungee jumper wise, you don't want to go over. You don't want to step the next step. There's a self-protection there. In fact, you see this in kids. When they feel fear, and sometimes other emotions, they will fight or flight pretty quickly, especially trauma kids. That they're one of their things that they do is when they feel something like fear, they will run, or they will hide, or they will attack. Like fear is a self-protection kind of emotion sometimes. But it can become a paralyzing and like, let's just walk into the story because hopefully this will explain it a little better. We'll be in Judges chapter 6. So if you have your Bibles, you can turn there. I'll be on the screen too. Let me just give you some background so you can kind of understand where in the context of the Bible this book is. So this is kind of after Moses led the people out of Egypt. And so this is the Old Testament. And they've come, and Joshua's led them, Joshua the leaders led them into the promised land, and they have conquered the promised land, and they're starting to settle in the promises of God. They're starting to live out those, like, in Deuteronomy, it talks about these blessings and cursings. If you follow me, he says, this is the way I'm going to bless your nation. If you choose not to follow me, this is how things are going to work out. The things you're going to have problems with. And so we see Joshua, they're starting to live in that promised land. For the first time, promise to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, centuries later, they're starting to feel the blessings of God. And guess what happens in Judges? Is they drift from the connection with God. Because God basically said, if you stay connected with me, if you keep me as the center of your worship, then you will experience the promises that I have for you. But if you follow other gods, it's going to fall apart. And so this Judges is a cycle, and you'll see it play out over and over and over again of these people who fall away from God. They start following other gods. They start doing it their way. And so they start having these ramifications of that. They find themselves in struggle. And then God says, all right, I hear you, and I'm going to respond to you because I'm faithful. And he shows up and he brings a judge, not a judge as in right or wrong, a judge as a rescuer, to bring them out of that spot. And you'll see in Judges, and by the way, that cycle plays out again and again and again. They go back into sin, there's a rescuer, and they come back to some kind of normal. And you'll see in Judges that the spirals out. Actually, the spiral gets worse and worse and worse. They rebel more and more and more. The judges, the people get crazier and crazier and crazier. Samson is in that cycle. If you're familiar with Samson, the long hair, the addiction to women and this weakness there, and he's in that cycle. And Deborah's in that cycle, and so you see this kind of flow. So we're talking about Gideon in Judges 6. So let me read. I'm going to read section by section to you. You'll hear in this first section the spiral that they're in. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites and the Amalekites and other eastern people invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza, and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep, nor cattle, nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count them on their camels. They invaded the land to ravage it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. So we see this kind of intro to the story, like Israel is in trouble because Midian is coming in and they're wiping out their food supply. It's not like they don't have Walmart. They don't have like Meniere's. They don't have these places they can go to. They have their crops. And Midian would come in and just bring their throngs of people. They're just people after people after, and they just wipe out all their crops. And so that left them poor, destitute, and starving. And so they are, and by the way, when they come in, they're so afraid of the Midianites that it says that they're hiding in caves. They're hiding in mountains. They're hiding. Does that not demonstrate fear? Like, isn't it? Like, they're afraid of these people. They're afraid of what's happening to them. They're in the middle of this crisis. They're in the middle of crazy circumstances. They're in the middle of an impossible situation. They have no army. They're not strong people. They're facing this multitude of people walking through. They have no way to do anything about this. And they feel weak and helpless. And so they go hide in caves. That's what fear feels like. You have some difficult circumstances. You have some difficult things that you're being asked to do. That there's something that is out there that you want to preserve. You want to hide. You want to pull back. You don't want to step into it. You want to pull away from it. That's what fear does. The reaction to something. When you have that fear, it's like, I don't want to go there. I don't want to do that. I need to bunker. I need a shelter. I need protection. And I will protect myself at all costs. That's what fear does. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. Now understand why this is happening. The Israelites, verse 1, did evil in the eyes of the Lord. This is again, in the Old Testament, they're deeply connected to these promises. The Israelites had seen God do amazing things. Red Sea parts. Bread from heaven, food, rescue from the most powerful nation in the world, water, like just water into the blood, and then all the 10 plagues, and over and over and over again. They came into Jericho, into the promised land, and they saw the walls of Jericho come tumbling down. They saw God do things that they could not do themselves, and yet they still choose to follow other gods. Because they chose to follow other gods, God says, all right, I'm going to let you experience what is natural. When we rebel against God, we feel the consequences. And he allows Midian to come in. All right, so this is what we'll keep moving through verse 7. When the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, a prophet is a spokesman of God. He says, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I rescued you from the hands of the Egyptians, and I delivered you from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. He says, I want you to know your history. I have done this, and I have done this, and I have been faithful here, and I've rescued you here. Do you notice how many times he says, I have done this? Because he has. Israel did nothing. Moses held a staff. He hit a rock a few times. Joshua marched around a wall. They didn't do much. You know what I mean? Like, God did it all. He's the one that does the rescuing. He delivered them from all your oppressors. He's connected. Like, you know, all the times that you were oppressed in this last history, I've delivered you from that. And you're facing it again. I said to you, verse 10, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live. But you have not listened. He's like, I want you to hear that in the sense of God's love. Yeah. Like, God wanted so desperately. Like, he gave them choice, but he gave them over and over, he gives them opportunity to come back. In fact, in the prophets later on, he talks about this kind of like prostitution that Israel constantly lived in. And then he would go and rescue him, bring him back to his house, and then go chase another man. Over and over again. He desired that he wanted them to experience his relationship, and yet they kept running after their gods. And so, but God answers. You know, it doesn't say, but you have not listened to me. Period. Stop. And he doesn't say what he's going to do next. He's like, all right, I'm not going to tell you how the story's going to end, but I want to tell you where you've been. Verse 11. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak of Orpah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. There's this guy. His name is Gideon. Gideon, the name means hewer, kind of like a tree, cut down trees kind of name. And he is hiding in a winepress, threshing grain. All right, so grain. Again, I'm not an agricultural person. All right, so understand that I don't get this exactly correct. But what the idea is you'd have grain, and the wind would take the stuff that you didn't want away. You needed the wind, you needed the hill, you needed out in the open in order to really get to what you wanted. He's hiding in a wine press, and so his wheat's bad, but he's living in fear. All right, do you get the fear here? Like, they need to eat. If he goes out in the open and does this, he's afraid that the Midianites will not just take his food, but will take his life. And so he's in a wine press, like a little circle where he'd stop on the grapes, doing his bread for the day. The next verse says, when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. That is probably the most powerful thing that any of us could ever hear when we're dealing with fear. Gideon is living in a time where there's oppression and there is poverty and there's weakness. He is feeling that weakness. In fact, later on he'll say, but God, I'm a part of the weakest tribe. I'm the weakest person in my tribe. I'm a nobody. I'm nothing. And God comes to him. The angel of the Lord comes to him and says, I am with you. The Lord is with you. Just stop there for a second. We talked about this idea of anchoring over the last series, anchoring in things. When you're dealing with the emotion of fear, the one thing you need to anchor into is that God's right there with you. Like, God is there. Almost every time that I see that phrase, do not be afraid, it'll be followed up with, I am with you. There's a VeggieTales song. There's a couple of them. God is bigger than some of you actually know. Boogeyman, he's bigger than it goes on to all. God is bigger. God is stronger. Like, when God is with you, he's next to you. You have nothing to fear because you have Superman. You have this powerful and all-knowing and all good and all loving. He's right there with you. There is nothing to fear when God's on your side. He has control of it all. You can step boldly into wherever he wants you to go because God is with you. God hasn't left you. He's not forsaken you. He is right there beside you. There's a phrase in the Old Testament that I love, and there's lots of connotation to it. There's a lot of pieces to it, but it talks about the fear of God. And I believe a part of the fear of God is seeing God bigger than anything else. All right? So your circumstances, what you're afraid of, so you have to identify your fear. You say, I'm fearful of, and then you might even have to go deeper that I'm fearful of that situation. But where that leads is this worst case, because what we do is we worst case scenario everything. Right? Here's the situation. And that may not be where the fear is, partially, but your fear is 5 steps down the road. This may happen, the worst case scenario may happen. And so I am scared. And God says, I am with you. I'm with you. I'm not going anywhere. We anchor ourselves in the character of God. And all of a sudden, the fear of that becomes so much smaller because we have the fear of God in our eyes. God is bigger. You ever greater than? You ever see the greater than sign? God, you probably can't read my writing. I wish I could write it backwards for you. God is greater than anything else. God is greater than your fear. God is greater than this election season. God is greater than COVID. God is greater than your struggle in a relationship. God is greater than the worst case scenario in your life. God is greater than anything else that you can face. So we anchor ourselves in that fact that God's not left you. You may be in tough situations. You may be facing impossible odds. You may be facing this David and Goliath, what feels like you're going to lose, you're going to fail, but God is greater. And I love the second part of it too. Mighty warrior. There's a movie that came out. There's a few of them that have this kind of theme in it. One of them has this guy who's an adult, and he's a musician, I believe, and he had an experience when he was a child with his mom in the hospital. And so he has this picture. There's a picture early in the movie of him, like walking into the hospital room as a child, watching his mom, I think, die. All right. And then later in his life, years later, he comes into the hospital room as an adult, and he goes back to him as a child. You ever feel like that? Like how you see yourself sometimes in a situation is like, I am a kid here. You go back to kind of how I am so weak. I am like whatever your identity, like I'm a failure. I have nothing. I'm a nobody. I am worthless. And when God kind of positions me, that's where Gideon is. Because we know this later on, he talks about his weakness. But God comes and says, I want you to know who I am. I'm with you. But I want you to know how I see you. You are my mighty warrior. Gideon doesn't see himself that way yet. Gideon would not be in charge of an army. Gideon would not lead the rescue from oppression. Gideon is living in fear. He's living in his weakness. He's living in a wine. He's like doing wine press stuff. And God comes to him in the wine press, in the middle of his fear, in the middle of him hiding. He says, I don't think I see you as someone who's a hider. I see you as a mighty warrior. A mighty warrior steps out into battle. A mighty warrior steps out in the middle of fear and takes out impossible circumstances. A mighty warrior is one who's going to bring victory when it doesn't look like victory is possible. We see ourselves as a weak person, as a weak something. We see ourselves as not being able to win this battle. And in reality, we're not. But because God is with us, we can be a mighty warrior. David and Goliath. David wasn't the strongest guy out there. David had very little training. All he had was some like shepherding experience. And yet because God was with him, he was a mighty warrior. Moses had no leadership skills. He failed the first time around. He's a murderer in his like how he's seen. And yet because God is with him, he is a great leader. He is a friend of God. He's going to lead the people up. Do you see how this is? God may not see you the way you see you. In the middle of your fear, in the middle of this emotion that's telling you to hide, God said, I want you to step out because I see you as more than you are. And you're more than you are because I am with you. I have designed you. I have put your mouth right where it's supposed to be and your eyes where they're supposed to be, and I will walk you through this. And by the way, the end of that little section is exclamation points. I don't think Hebrew really has exclamation points, but it is like sentence. Oh, what they used to say, mic drop. That's all you need to know there, Gideon. Step out of the wine press. All right, let's keep going. Verse 13. You can almost hear Gideon's like timidness. Pardon me, Lord. You do hear it a little bit. Can I break in here for a second? Look, stop the roll here. Let's talk a little. Pardon me, Lord, my Lord. But if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, "Did not the Lord bring us out of Egypt?" But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hands of Midian. Do you see how he sees? Do you hear him in this? He's like, I don't see God. Okay, going back. The Lord is with you. And then he's looking at his circumstances saying, where is God? Why is all this happening? Why are we in oppression? Now, he had probably maybe not heard the prophet or doesn't remember the prophet who said, you have not listened. But he's saying, just because you're in tough circumstances does not mean the Lord's not with you. It means maybe that the Lord wants to act in the middle of your tough circumstances. Let's keep going. Verse 14, the Lord turned to him and said, go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? All right. Gideon's like, we're in a bad situation, God. This is tough. The Midianites, this is awful. Where have you been? Dramatic pause. Gideon, that's why I have you. Wait, God, you got to do this a different way. No, go in the strength you have. Take your first step. Sometimes our strength can only, that first step is a step of faith, and that's our step, that's our strength, and then God carries the rest of the way. Go, just go, and let me come with you, and then let me show you that you're a mighty warrior. Verse 16, verse 15. Pardon me, my Lord, Gideon replied. How can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least of my family. Do you see how he sees himself? Do you see? This is who I am. I don't think you must not know. You must not know who I am. You must not know that I'm the weakest of my tribe, and my tribe is the weakest of Israel. Verse 16, the Lord answered, he will repeat this. I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive. I will be with you. Let me just jump down to verse 24. We'll start in verse 23. But the Lord said to Gideon, after a little bit more interaction, going back and forth, peace. Do not be afraid. You're not going to die. So Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and called it the Lord is peace. Is it possible that in the middle of our fear, whatever your fear is, you might need to write it down and say, this is the fear that I'm living in right now. God could come in the middle and say, I am with you, and I want you to experience peace. Is it possible in the middle of fear to find peace? What I would suggest is that as you lean into the presence of God in your life, in the middle of the circumstances, in the middle of the crazy things that are happening, in the midst of you wanting to hide, wanting to run, wanting to freeze, wanting to get away from it all, and maybe God's calling you to step in. Maybe in the midst of that storm, he's saying, peace be still. I got this. Just walk in trust of me. This is a crazy year. I don't even know how you even put it in perspective of what's happened this year. And some of you have individual stories in the middle of this year that have added to the dramatic of the whole view of it. And you're living in the season of if you would go into the doctor, you feel like some of you feel it physically, the emotion that you have right now. Like you're wearing it. You may have trained your face to smile when someone says, "How are you?" But you're in the middle of all that's going on. You are you can't even sleep at night sometimes because you're so fearful. And that emotion is a gift from God because it allows us to step into this word called trust and experience His presence even in the midst of fear. And I would say this: in order to live a life of faith, you probably will always be stepping into fear. If you want to live a life of faith, you probably will always be coming against the emotion of fear. And probably faith is stepping, even in the midst of it. So as we walk through this series, we'll be talking about some other emotions, other things that you so maybe I just want you to pause and hear that phrase again. And then we'll pray. The Lord is with you, mighty Lord. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, this emotion of fear is something that kind of ties us up. It can oppress us. It can keep us in our houses, in our rooms, turn the lights off, sleeping. We have fear in all sorts of different areas. But God, I thank you for the promise that you have never left us nor forsaken us. That we can breathe deep in your presence. That we can live in obedience to you. That we want to live a life of faith. We don't want to ignore the fear and ignore that feeling. We want to engage it in a way that brings glory to you. So God, I pray that you bring peace in the midst of fear. Somehow they both can live in us as we wrestle. In Jesus' name.